Today, we're digging into a pretty radical new way of looking at why we clash with people. Forget everything you think you know about emotions or miscommunication. This is about the very architecture of our minds. We're going to explore the structural mechanics of misalignment.
So let's start with a question we've all asked ourselves probably a million times. Why do we really clash? You know that feeling, right? You're in a conversation, it's just going in circles, and it feels like you're speaking completely different languages. Well, what if the reason for that clash isn't what we've always been told it is?
Usually, we chalk it up to a misunderstanding or, a personality clash, or just someone having an emotional reaction. That's the common view. But what if the real cause is something more architectural, something deterministic, something almost mechanical? That's the structural view we're looking at today.
Okay, so to really get our heads around this new perspective, we first have to throw out our most common assumption. This is not a communication problem. Here it is. This is the core idea from the source material that just changes everything. Misalignment is not conversational, it is architectural. That one sentence completely reframes the issue. It pulls it away from words and feelings and puts it squarely in the realm of pure structure. So, just to be crystal clear, when we say misalignment, we are not talking about a simple disagreement. It's not the same as conflict or emotional volatility, and it's definitely not just a case of poor communication. No, it's a much deeper, underlying structural thing. So if misalignment is architectural, what does that actually mean? Well, that brings us to our second section, the architecture of thought. So here's the key definition. Misalignment is the structural incompatibility of two cognitive systems when they're put under a shared load. Okay, think of it this way. Imagine two bridges, designed completely differently, trying to support the exact same weight. If their core designs are incompatible, that shared stress is going to cause a breakdown. The exact same thing happens inside our heads.
And this is why this whole perspective is so powerful. I mean, if misalignment is truly structural, it means it's predictable, it's measurable, and it's deterministic. It basically turns a messy, confusing human problem into something we can analyze and understand, kind of like an engineering puzzle.
All right, section 3, clash of the structures. Let's get into the real nitty-gritty of why these cognitive architectures actually slam into each other. So the first concept we need to get is load pathways. See, every time we interact with someone on something complex, like, say, planning a trip or debating a project, we're putting a load on our minds. Load pathways are just the routes that all that pressure and complexity travel along inside our cognitive system.
And here's where it all goes wrong. Imagine one person's mind is built to distribute that load really widely, kind of like a snowshoe on snow. But the other person's mind funnels all that pressure down one narrow channel, like a stiletto heel. When they try to solve a problem together, those two systems are just fundamentally at odds. The pressure that one person handles with ease could literally cause the other system to bend and break. They just can't work together.
The second mechanical reason this happens is what the source calls topological conflict. Just think of topology as the fundamental shape or the blueprint of a person's mind. And when two people with really different mental blueprints try to work together, those shapes just can't mesh. They can't integrate, and the result is total instability.
So what happens when a really flexible, open-minded system interacts with a rigid, brittle one? Well, the interaction itself actually generates all these negative forces. You get distortion in what people hear, you get amplification of tiny issues into huge problems, and you get cognitive overload. And then there's this one the source calls identity compression, that awful feeling of being forced into a box, a smaller, dumber version of yourself. The structures are literally deforming each other in real time.
And our final mechanical piece of the puzzle is the coherence collision. Look, coherence is just a fancy word for a system's ability to stay stable and hold itself together when things get tough. And as you can probably guess, we all have very, very different abilities to do this. And this difference creates a really profound asymmetry. A system with high coherence can handle a ton of complexity and stay stable, but a system with low coherence under the very same load just starts to fall apart. It loses its shape. So you get this situation where one person stays themselves, while the other person essentially becomes a walking, talking stress response. And that's not a personality flaw. It's a structural reality.
Which brings us to section 4, the structural echo. So how do these invisible, deep-down mechanics actually show up in our day-to-day conversations?
Now this right here is a huge takeaway. What we call a misunderstanding isn't actually a failure to listen or understand. It's the natural, predictable behavior that pops out when two structures are misaligned.
I mean, when two mental architectures are being bent in opposite directions, of course they're going to perceive each other's words as being twisted and distorted.
Oh, and it gets so much worse, because this whole thing creates a vicious feedback loop. The mental structures, the topologies, they start to deform. That makes their stability, their coherence, drop. This distorts how each person interprets the other, which then increases the pressure on the whole system, and the cycle just starts all over again. This is exactly why these arguments feel so overwhelming and spiral so badly out of control.
We have all seen this happen. Somebody gets defensive. But if we look at it from a structural view, this is actually identity narrowing. It's a protective move. The person's system is trying to prevent a total collapse by radically simplifying itself. It becomes rigid, it loses all nuance, it starts seeing everything in black and white. Not because the person is being malicious, but as a last-ditch effort to maintain its own structural integrity.
So the crucial point to remember is this: behavior is the echo, misalignment is the cause. The argument, the frustration, the person shutting down, that's all just a final, visible symptom. It's the echo of a much deeper structural problem happening way down below the surface.
And that brings us to our final section, seeing the blueprint. What does all of this actually mean for us? What do we do with this?
Well, it means that taking these things personally is at its core a perceptual error. It's a mistake. The other person's system isn't reacting to you, the person. It's reacting to the structural load that the interaction is creating. It really is mechanical, not personal.
And when you look at it this way, this model has incredible explanatory power. It explains everything from simple miscommunication all the way to a total relational breakdown. It explains that sudden reactivity, projection, why people just completely shut down. All of these things that seem so psychological are actually just the echoes of a structural collision.
Which leaves us with a final and pretty fascinating question. If misalignment really is mechanical, if it's predictable and deterministic, then what could we build if we finally understood the blueprint? What new ways of collaborating, of communicating, of connecting with each other become possible when we stop blaming the person and start instead looking at the architecture? Something to think about.